My parents said, "Yeah, right, Trent loves you too much to hurt you," after he snapped my arm for refusing to do his homework. When I cried, my dad slapped me and called me a liar. I stayed silent. That was 10 years ago. Last week, I testified against them for running a family fraud ring. I was a slave to my older brother growing up. He never wanted to do his homework and wanted to go play with his friends, so he always passed it to me to do. I learned early on that if I ever say no, I'd come back home from school to find my room trashed and all of my clothes ripped. I thought about telling my parents all the time, but I desperately wanted my brother to love me. So I buried the pain away and convinced myself and my parents that Trent was the best big brother. But that's where I messed up. My lies were dangerously good, because when I told Trent I was done doing his homework, he snapped my arm and my parents never believed me. They said, "Yeah, right, Trent loves you too much to hurt you," my dad said before slapping me across the face for telling lies. And even though my intuition was screaming at me to get revenge on Trent, I didn't, because I knew that if he was never punished for being abusive towards me, then his behavior would eventually pass on to my parents. And I was right, because when I was 16 and Trent was 19, I caught him stealing money from our mom's purse in the middle of the night, but I knew telling on him meant putting my life in danger, so I kept it a secret. Over the next few weeks, I heard him sneaking out at 2 a.m. every weekend, and whenever he returned home, he would make the entire apartment reek of the devil's lettuce. I wasn't sure if my parents knew or not, but a month later, I finally got my answer, because just as Trent walked in at 6 a.m., my dad caught him. "Trent, what's going on, buddy? You've been coming home reeking of dargs for weeks now." I tensed up, and that's when I heard a smack. "I'm an adult. I can do what I want," was all Trent said in response, before going to bed and sleeping for the entire day. When he woke up and joined us for dinner, I expected my dad to hit him back, or at least tell him what he did wasn't acceptable. But no, he just asked Trent if he wanted some salt with his meal, and we were all forced to play happy family and pretend like everything was okay. And maybe my parents were happy to live in fear of their son, but I wasn't. So a week later, I moved in with my friend who lived a block away. Neither of my parents asked why, because they already knew the answer. I didn't talk to them much after that. Fast forward to 5 years later. I was 22, working as an operations analyst and making $50,000 a year. It was around this time that I got the call. It was my mom, and it was the first time she had called me since the day I moved out. I picked up reluctantly, and she was in tears. "Honey, me and your father need you. Trent is stuck in Colombia." I took a deep breath to gather my thoughts and calmly asked what the F was going on. That's when I heard my dad's voice. "Trent told us there was a job waiting for him in Colombia, but as soon as he got in the taxi from the airport, his buddies stole his passport, and now they won't give it back unless we pay up." "How much is it, Dad?" I asked with a sigh. "They're asking for $12,000, and if we don't pay now, it'll double tomorrow." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Dad, I'm still paying back my student loans and—" "Honey, we wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Please!" I walked over to the nearest mirror and stared at myself. Was this really what my life had come to? I don't even know why I agreed. I guess I just figured that at least now, I would never have to hear about him again. That thought alone was enough to put me on cloud 9, and I spent the rest of the week with a huge smile on my face. But Trent found a way to ruin that too. I was fast asleep on a Thursday night when I got another call from my mom. This time I didn't pick up, and she started spam texting me about needing another $6,000 for Trent. Turns out, after the passport fiasco, my parents never forced him to come home. So Trent decided to put his trust in the same people who stole his passport, because now he was one of them. Or so he thought, until they took him hostage and demanded money again. I told my mom no, because even if I wanted to help, I simply couldn't. My bank account was completely empty, and I had already sold my car to help with student loan debt. In response, her and my dad started texting me at the same time saying I was an effing disgrace, that I should have saved more money to help pay. I blocked them both, turned on flight mode, slept like a baby with a silk eye mask over my face, but they still couldn't leave me alone. 3 weeks later, my mom had somehow reached my work phone. "We effing hate you! Consider yourself disowned," was the first thing she said. Then my dad chimed in. "When we couldn't pay the hostage fee, Trent got set up by his friends for darg trafficking. Now he's being sentenced. We might never see our baby boy again. All because of you. Any other good news for me?" I responded with a smirk on my face. I was about to hang up, but then I heard a voice in the background. It was Trent. "Tell her I'm getting 25 years. Maybe she'll finally crack." My heart dropped. They weren't calling from Colombia. They were calling from home. My family had decided to take advantage of me, and I had fallen for it. I sat frozen at my desk, the work phone still pressed against my ear, even though they'd already hung up. My hands trembled as the full weight of their deception crashed over me. Every single detail had been orchestrated. The Colombia story, the stolen passport, the hostage demands, the substance trafficking sentence, all of it fabricated to steal $12,000 from me. My coworkers glanced over with concern as I remained motionless, but I couldn't move. The rage building inside me felt volcanic. They'd weaponized my childhood trauma, exploited every ounce of guilt they'd programmed into me, and turned my desperate need for family connection into a weapon against me. I finally set down the phone and opened my laptop with shaking fingers. If they thought I'd just accept this betrayal, they were wrong. I started documenting everything, screenshotting our text conversations, downloading bank transfer records, saving voicemails. Every piece of evidence that proved their elaborate fraud went into a folder I labeled Family Scam. The bank was my first call. My voice steadied as I explained the situation to the fraud department representative. She listened patiently as I detailed how my family had obtained the wire transfer through false pretenses, claiming an international emergency that never existed. The representative explained that family fraud cases were particularly challenging to pursue, but she strongly advised filing a police report for financial abuse. She gave me a case number and promised to flag the transaction while their investigation team reviewed my claim. I realized then that recovering my money would require proving the Colombia story was completely fabricated. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I searched international travel records and databases. Within an hour, I discovered that Trent's passport had never been used for international travel in the past year, not once. The social media investigation proved even more revealing. I found Trent's barely used Instagram account and scrolled through his recent posts. There he was, 3 weeks ago, at a local bar with friends. 2 weeks ago, at a basketball game in our city. Last week, posting a selfie from what was clearly our parents' living room. He'd been home the the entire time they claimed he was trapped in Colombia. I screenshot every single post, saving them with timestamps that directly contradicted the supposed hostage timeline. My phone rang again, my parents calling from their home number. I let it go to voicemail. Their message demanded more money for Trent's Colombian legal defense. They claimed they'd found a lawyer who could reduce his sentence, but needed an immediate payment. Even after being caught, they were doubling down on the lie. I called them back immediately. My mother answered on the first ring, launching into her rehearsed plea before I could speak. I cut her off. I know Trent's home. I heard his voice on our last call. Silence. Then my father's voice, defensive and aggressive. You misheard. The stress is making you imagine things. I have proof he never left the country. His social media shows him here the entire time you claimed he was kidnapped. They hung up on me. 20 minutes later, I received an email with attachments, fake legal documents with Colombian court letterheads, forged prisoner intake forms, even a fabricated police report. They'd prepared an entire portfolio of fraudulent materials to support their scam. I forwarded everything to my bank's fraud department and began researching how to verify legal documents from Colombia. The embassy website had a contact number for American Citizen Services. I dialed it immediately. The embassy representative was thorough and professional. After taking down Trent's full name and supposed case details, she put me on hold to check their records. 10 minutes later, she confirmed what I already knew. No American citizen named Trent with our family name appeared in any Colombian legal system database. Armed with official confirmation, I called my parents again. This time, my mother answered with tears already in her voice. The embassy has no record of Trent being in Colombia. You need to return my money immediately. The embassy is part of the cover-up, she wailed. How can you abandon your family in a crisis? We raised you better than this. The blame shifting had begun. Within hours, my phone started ringing with calls from extended family members. My aunt called first, her voice stern and disappointed. She'd received a call from my parents claiming I was refusing to help save Trent from a Colombian prison. My uncle texted next, demanding I do something about Trent's legal situation. Then my cousin, asking why I was being so heartless during a family emergency. My grandmother left a voicemail expressing her shock at my selfishness. I realized my parents were systematically calling every relative, painting me as the villain who abandoned her brother to rot in a foreign prison. They were recruiting flying monkeys to pressure me into silence or compliance. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd given me the evidence I needed to expose them to everyone. I created a group chat with my extended family members, uploading every piece of evidence I'd collected. The passport records showing Trent had never left the country. The embassy confirmation stating no American citizen named Trent existed in Colombian legal databases. The screenshots from his social media proving he'd been home the entire time. The fake legal documents my parents had sent, which I'd verified were forgeries through the embassy. My aunt was the first to respond. She called me directly, her voice shaking with fury. She'd given my parents $2,000 just yesterday for Trent's supposed legal fees. My uncle followed shortly after, revealing he'd wired them $3,000 the week before. My cousin admitted to sending $1,500. Even my grandmother had emptied part of her savings to help with the fake crisis. The group chat exploded with activity as more relatives came forward. Each one had been contacted separately, told slightly different versions of the Colombia story, and manipulated into sending money. The amounts varied, but the pattern was clear. My parents had systematically worked through the entire extended family, extracting money from everyone who would listen. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from my parents. I declined it and watched as they tried calling other family members instead. No one answered. The group chat showed everyone comparing notes, realizing they'd all been played. The fury was palpable even through text messages. My grandmother called me privately, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. She explained how my parents had cried on her doorstep, showing her the same fake documents they'd sent me. She'd given them $5,000 from her retirement fund, money she couldn't afford to lose. The betrayal in her voice made my chest tighten. Within hours, my parents found themselves completely isolated. Family members who'd been pressuring me to help were now demanding answers from them instead. The group chat became a coordination center as relatives shared their experiences and calculated the total amount stolen. It exceeded $25,000 across the extended family. My parents attempted damage control by calling my aunt, insisting the Colombia situation was real and everyone was overreacting. She put them on speaker during a family gathering, letting everyone hear their desperate lies. When confronted about the embassy confirmation, they claimed it was a conspiracy, that corrupt officials were hiding Trent's case. The room erupted in bitter laughter at their ridiculous excuse. Trent made his first appearance in the scam when my parents forced him to join a video call with the family. He sat in what was obviously their living room, trying to convince everyone he was calling from a Colombian prison. The wood paneling behind him was identical to my childhood home. Family members took screenshots, pointing out familiar furniture and decorations visible in the background. The facade crumbled completely when my teenage cousin noticed Trent's reflection in a picture frame behind him. It showed him wearing the same shirt he'd posted on Instagram 2 days ago, standing in my parents' kitchen. The evidence was undeniable. They'd been caught red-handed in their elaborate lie. My uncle, a usually calm and measured man, drove to my parents' house that evening. I heard about the confrontation through my aunt, who went with him. They demanded immediate repayment of all stolen money. My parents refused to answer the door, hiding inside while my uncle pounded on it. Neighbors came out to investigate the commotion, and my parents were forced to call the police to remove my uncle from their property. This escalation changed everything. My uncle filed a police report for fraud that night, and other family members followed suit. By morning, 5 separate fraud complaints had been filed against my parents and Trent. The local police department assigned a detective to investigate what was clearly an organized scam operation. I met with the detective assigned to the case, bringing my carefully organized evidence folder. She reviewed everything methodically, taking notes and asking detailed questions about the timeline. She seemed particularly interested in the fake legal documents, explaining that forging official government papers elevated this beyond simple fraud. The detective revealed something that stunned me. This wasn't the first time my parents' names had come up in fraud investigations. 2 years ago, a distant relative had filed a complaint about a suspicious medical emergency involving Trent. The case had been dropped when the relative decided not to pursue charges, but the report remained remained on file. Armed with this information, I reached out to that distant relative. She reluctantly shared her story. My parents had claimed Trent had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer and needed expensive experimental treatment. She'd given them $3,000 before growing suspicious when Trent posted pictures of himself at a music festival during his supposed chemotherapy. She'd been too embarrassed to tell other family members about being scammed. The detective asked me to reach out to any other relatives who might have been targeted in the past. What I discovered painted a picture of systematic fraud going back years. An elderly great aunt had given money for Trent's fictional car accident. A cousin had contributed to his fake scholarship fund. Each scam was carefully crafted to avoid overlap, targeting different branches of the family tree with different stories. My parents must have sensed the walls closing in. They showed up at my workplace the next morning, causing a scene in the lobby. Security had to escort them out as they screamed about family loyalty and how I was destroying them. My manager witnessed the entire incident and suggested I work from home for a few days for my safety. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Trent, using a burner phone. He tried to negotiate, offering to return half the money if I convinced everyone to drop the charges. When I didn't respond, the messages became increasingly desperate, then threatening. I forwarded everything to the detective. The investigation accelerated when the detective subpoenaed my parents' bank records. The pattern of deposits matched the timeline of their various scams perfectly. Large cash deposits appeared within days of each family member being contacted about a fake emergency. The money trail was clear and damning. My parents' attempts at covering their tracks were amateur at best. They'd used the stolen money for luxury purchases, vacation packages, and gambling debts. The Colombian emergency funds had paid for a new entertainment system and designer clothing. My grandmother's retirement money had gone toward a cruise they'd taken last month. The detective informed me that the prosecutor's office was interested in the case. The combination of multiple victims, forged documents, and the substantial amount stolen made it a priority. She warned me that my parents might try to flee and suggested I alert her if I noticed any unusual behavior. That warning proved prophetic. My cousin who lived near my parents reported seeing them loading suitcases into their car at 3 in the morning. She called the police immediately. Officers arrived to find them attempting to leave the state with several $1,000s in cash hidden in their vehicle. The arrest made the local news. "Family fraud ring busted," read the headline, though they kept the names private pending formal charges. My phone exploded with messages from extended family members who'd seen the report. The relief in their messages was palpable. Finally, there would be accountability. Trent wasn't at the house during the arrest. He'd apparently fled earlier, but his freedom was short-lived. Police found him at a bus station 2 towns over, trying to buy a ticket with cash. He drastically underestimated how seriously law enforcement would take the case. His arrest came 12 hours after my parents. The bail hearing revealed more details about the scope of their crimes. The prosecutor presented evidence of planning that went back years. They'd found notebooks with detailed information about family members' finances, emotional triggers, and the best stories to extract money from each person. It was sociopathic in its calculated cruelty. Bail was set high enough that my parents couldn't pay it, even if they hadn't spent all the stolen money. They remained in custody awaiting trial. Trent's bail was even higher due to his flight risk. For the first time in my life, they faced real consequences for their actions. The extended family rallied around the victims, especially my grandmother. A fund was established to help recover some of her losses. The cousin who'd been too embarrassed to report the cancer scam came forward publicly, adding her testimony to the growing case. The shame of being scammed was replaced by collective anger at the perpetrators. I met with the prosecutor to discuss my testimony. She explained that my evidence was crucial to establishing the pattern of fraud. The fake Colombian documents, in particular, would likely result in additional federal charges. She seemed confident about the case, but warned me that family cases could be emotionally difficult. My parents tried reaching out through their court-appointed attorneys, requesting a meeting. They wanted to apologize and work out a plea deal. I declined. Years of manipulation and abuse couldn't be erased with a convenient apology motivated by self-preservation. The attorneys respected my decision and didn't press further. The discovery phase of the legal proceedings revealed even more victims outside the family. My parents had run similar scams on neighbors, church members, and co-workers over the years. The prosecutor amended the charges to reflect a broader pattern of fraud. What had started as a family matter had exposed a criminal enterprise. Trent's attorney attempted a different strategy, claiming he'd been coerced by my parents into participating. This narrative fell apart when investigators found the digital evidence on his laptop. He'd researched kidnapping scenarios, downloaded templates for fake legal documents, and even practiced different accents for phone calls. He wasn't a victim, he was the architect. The trial date was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, the family worked on healing from the betrayal. Support groups for fraud victims became a regular part of my routine. Hearing others' stories helped me process my own trauma. The therapist leading the group specialized in family betrayal and helped me understand the complex emotions I was experiencing. My workplace was incredibly supportive throughout the ordeal. They provided paid leave for court appearances and connected me with their employee assistance program for counseling. My manager shared that she'd experienced something similar with her brother and understood the unique pain of family fraud. As the trial approached, more evidence surfaced. Investigators found that my parents had been planning to expand their operation. They'd collected information on extended family members' friends, creating a database of potential future victims. The calculated nature of their crimes removed any doubt about their intentions. The prosecutor met with all the victims before trial to prepare us for testimony. She explained that my parents' defense would likely try to paint them as desperate people who made mistakes. Our job was to show the pattern of deliberate deception and the emotional damage beyond the financial losses. My grandmother's testimony preparation was particularly difficult. At 82, she'd never imagined her own son would steal from her. The prosecutor gently walked her through her statement, ensuring she understood that none of this was her fault. The victim advocate assigned to the case provided additional support. 2 weeks before trial, Trent's attorney approached with a plea deal offer. He would testify against my parents in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutor considered it, knowing his testimony could strengthen the case. After consulting with the victims, she accepted. Trent would still serve time, but less than than if convicted on all charges. His testimony during the pre-trial deposition was revealing. He detailed how they'd planned each scam, choosing victims based on emotional vulnerability and financial stability. My name had been on their list for years, waiting for the right moment when I'd stabilized financially. The Columbia story was specifically crafted based on my childhood trauma and desire for family connection. The trial began on a cold Monday morning. The courthouse was packed with family members, all seeking justice for their losses. My parents entered in orange jumpsuits, looking smaller and older than I remembered. They avoided eye contact with everyone in the gallery. The prosecutor's opening statement laid out the case methodically. She described a pattern of fraud spanning years, targeting the most vulnerable family members with elaborate emotional manipulation. The evidence would show deliberate planning and zero remorse for the damage caused. The defense attorney tried to humanize my parents, describing them as people who'd made terrible choices due to financial pressure. He urged the jury to consider their desperation and the fact that they'd targeted family, not strangers, suggesting this somehow made it less criminal. My testimony came on the second day. I walked the jury through my history with Trent, the abuse I'd endured, and how my parents had weaponized that trauma for financial gain. I presented the evidence I'd collected, explaining how I'd discovered the Columbia lie. The fake documents were entered into evidence, their poor quality almost insulting in hindsight. The defense attorney's cross-examination focused on my estrangement from the family, trying to paint me as a bitter child seeking revenge. I remained calm, sticking to facts and evidence. When he suggested I could have afforded to help more, the prosecutor objected successfully. My finances weren't on trial. Other family members testified throughout the week. Each story added another layer to the pattern of deception. My aunt broke down describing how she'd skipped medical procedures to send money for Trent's fake emergency. My uncle detailed how the stress had affected his marriage. The human cost beyond money became clear. My grandmother's testimony was the most powerful. She spoke quietly but firmly about trusting her son, about the retirement dreams now shattered. When asked if she wanted to see them punished, she said yes without hesitation. The woman who'd always preached forgiveness had found her limit. Trent took the stand as the prosecution's final witness. His testimony was damaging to my parents' defense. He admitted to creating the fake documents, researching scam techniques, and coaching my parents on what to say. He showed no emotion as he detailed their crimes, seemingly focused only on reducing his own sentence. The defense's case was weak. They called character witnesses who hadn't been victims, people who described my parents as loving and generous. Under cross-examination, each admitted they'd never lent my parents money and didn't know about the fraud until the arrests. Their testimony felt hollow against the mountain of evidence. My parents chose not to testify, which the judge instructed couldn't be held against them, but their silence spoke volumes to those of us who knew their manipulative nature. Without the ability to spin their narrative directly, they looked guilty and defeated. Closing arguments brought everything full circle. The prosecutor reminded the jury that family fraud was particularly heinous because it exploited trust and love. She asked them to consider the planning involved, the lack of remorse, and the devastating impact on victims who'd never fully trust again. The defense made one last attempt to minimize the crimes, arguing that keeping the money within the family somehow lessened the severity. He urged mercy, suggesting probation and restitution rather than incarceration. The argument felt desperate and unconvincing. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. As they filed back in, I held my breath. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts. My parents showed no emotion, but I saw my mother's hands shaking as the judge thanked the jury for their service. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. The judge ordered a pre-sentencing investigation to determine appropriate punishment. The prosecutor indicated she would seek maximum sentences given the number of victims and lack of remorse. The defense would argue for leniency, but their options were limited. During the sentencing hearing, victim impact statements were read. Family member after family member described the betrayal's effect on their lives. Beyond the financial losses, they spoke of shattered trust, ruined relationships, and the pain of being targeted by people they'd loved. I chose to submit a written statement rather than speak. In it, I described a lifetime of abuse culminating in this final betrayal. I asked the judge to consider not just this crime, but the pattern of exploitation that had defined my relationship with my family. I wanted them to understand that their actions had consequences. The judge's decision was thorough and harsh. She acknowledged the severe breach of trust and the calculated nature of the crimes. My parents each received 5 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. They were also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, though everyone knew that money was long gone. Trent received 3 years as part of his plea agreement. The judge made it clear that his cooperation was the only reason for leniency. She expressed particular disgust at his willingness to exploit family bonds for profit. He would serve his time in a different facility from my parents. As they were led away in handcuffs, my mother finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't remorseful, but accusatory, as if I were the one who'd wronged her. It was the final confirmation that I'd made the right choice in pursuing justice. Some people never change, even when faced with the consequences of their actions. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected peace. The extended family grew closer through shared experience. Regular gatherings replaced the fractures caused by the fraud. We'd learned to protect ourselves while still maintaining loving relationships with those who deserve trust. I returned to therapy to process everything that had happened. The therapist helped me understand that seeking justice wasn't revenge, but self-protection. She validated my decision to maintain no contact with my parents, even after their eventual release. Some relationships are too toxic to salvage. Work became a refuge where I could focus on building my future. My manager promoted me partly in recognition of how I'd handled the crisis. The raise helped me rebuild my savings and pay off the remaining student loans. Financial stability felt even more precious after nearly losing it to family manipulation. The fraud victim support group became an important part of my healing. I eventually began facilitating sessions, helping others navigate the complex emotions of family betrayal. Sharing my story helped others feel less alone in their experiences. Together, we learned that survival was possible. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from prison. It was from my mother, full of blame and manipulation. She accused me of destroying the family and claimed I'd regret my actions. parents, I didn't respond. Instead, I filed it with the restraining order paperwork I'd obtained to prevent contact after their release. The extended family established new traditions that didn't include my parents or Trent. Holidays became joyful again without the underlying tension of their presence. My grandmother, despite her losses, seemed lighter without the burden of enabling their behavior. She'd found peace in accountability. I began speaking at fraud prevention seminars, sharing my story to help others recognize the warning signs. The details of family fraud were often overlooked, but my experience showed how devastating it could be. If my story prevented one person from falling victim, the painful exposure was worthwhile. Dating became easier once I'd processed the trauma. I learned to recognize manipulation tactics early and set firm boundaries. My partner understood my history and supported my decision to maintain distance from my parents. Healthy relationships were possible after all. The restitution payments began arriving sporadically as my parents worked prison jobs. The amounts were tiny, but the symbolic value mattered. Each check represented accountability they'd avoided their entire lives. Most victims donated the money to fraud prevention organizations. As their release date approached, I prepared for potential contact attempts. The restraining orders were renewed, and I informed my workplace and apartment complex about the situation. I wouldn't live in fear, but preparation was prudent. The extended family made similar arrangements. 5 years after that initial phone call about Colombia, I'd built a life free from their influence. My career flourished, my relationships were healthy, and my financial security was restored. The scars remained, but they no longer defined me. I'd learned that protecting yourself from toxic family isn't selfish, but necessary. The fraud had ultimately failed in its deepest intention. Instead of destroying me financially and emotionally, it had freed me from a lifetime of manipulation. The family bonds that mattered had strengthened through adversity. Those who'd shown their true nature were exactly where they belonged, facing consequences for their choices. My story became a cautionary tale within the extended family, ensuring future generations understood that love doesn't mean enabling abuse. Boundaries were healthy, and holding people accountable was sometimes the most loving thing you could do. The cycle of manipulation had finally been broken. Looking ahead, I felt hopeful. The trauma would always be part of my history, but it no longer controlled my future. I'd survived their worst betrayal and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. The little girl who desperately wanted her brother's love had grown into a woman who knew her worth. The extended family's recovery continued as well. Trust slowly rebuilt among those who'd proven themselves worthy. We'd learned valuable lessons about verification and healthy skepticism, even with family. The experience had taught us that blind trust could be dangerous, but chosen trust with the right people was beautiful. The extended family members also received restitution for their losses from various scams. The family home sold to pay court-ordered restitution, leaving my parents with nothing. Trent's sentencing hearing revealed multiple other fraud attempts against non-family members. The judge sentenced maximum penalties due to the sophisticated nature of fraud schemes. My parents received 3 to 5 years, while Trent faced 7 to 10 years for orchestrating multiple conspiracies. I was finally free from financial obligations to the family that exploited my entire life. The extended family relationships rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. My grandmother apologized for years of enabling abuse by not seeing warning signs. Family gatherings became possible again without fear of financial scams or emotional manipulation. I began therapy to process the lifetime of abuse and recent financial exploitation. The sessions helped me understand patterns I'd normalized since childhood. The therapist specialized in family trauma and financial abuse recovery. She helped me recognize how my parents had programmed me from birth to prioritize their needs over my own survival. 1 year later, my parents attempted contact from prison. They sent letters through the prison mail system claiming they'd learned their lesson. The manipulation attempts continued even from behind bars. I maintained the no-contact order, having learned that some relationships were too toxic to salvage. Trent wrote letters from prison alternating between apologies and blame, showing no genuine change. The prison counselor contacted me asking about family therapy sessions. I declined immediately. The counselor seemed surprised but respected my decision after I explained the extent of their crimes. I focused on building a life free from financial and emotional manipulation. My career advancement accelerated without family constantly demanding money for fake emergencies. The promotion I'd received helped rebuild my savings faster than expected. I moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. New relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation and guilt became possible. I learned to recognize red flags early and set boundaries without guilt. My partner understood my background and never pushed me to reconcile with my imprisoned family members. The extended family maintained boundaries with imprisoned members while supporting each other. We created new holiday traditions that didn't revolve around my parents' house. My grandmother hosted gatherings where genuine connection replaced the old patterns of manipulation and fear. I became an advocate for family fraud victims, helping others recognize manipulation tactics. Local support groups invited me to share my experience. I focused on practical advice about documenting evidence and protecting assets from family predators. Speaking engagements about financial abuse helped other victims escape similar situations. Community centers requested presentations about recognizing family fraud schemes. I developed a checklist of warning signs based on my family's tactics. The legal precedent from our case helped prosecutors pursue other family fraud cases. The detective who'd handled our case contacted me about similar patterns in new investigations. My documented evidence became a template for building strong fraud cases. 5 years passed since the initial Colombia scam attempt. My parents became eligible for parole hearings. I submitted victim impact statements opposing their early release. The parole board denied their requests based on the lack of genuine remorse shown. My career flourished without constant financial sabotage. I'd been promoted twice more and now managed a team. The financial stability I'd fought so hard to achieve felt unshakable. My emergency fund exceeded 6 months of expenses. Healthy relationships proved life improved dramatically without toxic family interference. My partner and I bought a small house together. We hosted gatherings for chosen family who supported our growth rather than exploited our resources. The extended family members who'd been victims found their own paths to recovery. My aunt started her own business with the money she'd saved by not funding fake emergencies. My uncle's marriage strengthened after removing the stress of constant financial manipulation. My grandmother celebrated her 87th birthday surrounded by family members who genuinely cared for her well-being. She'd recovered emotionally from the betrayal, though the financial losses remained. The family fund we'd created helped ensure her basic needs were met. Prison officials notified victims when my parents attempted to run scams from inside. They'd tried convincing other inmates' families to send money for various fake legal expenses. The scheme failed when prison staff intercepted their communications. Trent faced additional charges for the prison fraud attempts, his sentence extended by another 2 years. The pattern of manipulation continued even in confinement, proving rehabilitation wasn't happening. I learned that protecting yourself from family doesn't make you selfish, but wise. The guilt I'd carried for decades dissolved as I recognized the abuse patterns. Setting boundaries became second nature, rather than a source of anxiety. My story helped other victims recognize their own toxic family dynamics. Support group members often thanked me for showing them that escape was possible. We created a network of survivors who understood the unique pain of family betrayal. The financial recovery took years, but eventually felt complete. My credit score rebounded from the damage of giving away my savings. Investment accounts grew steadily without constant raids for manufactured crises. Professional success came easier without family drama consuming my mental energy. I earned industry certifications that led to better opportunities. My income doubled from where it had been during the Columbia scam. Relationships with trustworthy extended family members deepened through shared survival. We looked out for each other in healthy ways. My cousin started a group chat for positive family updates only, banning any requests for money. The restraining orders required renewal as my parents' release dates approached. I prepared documentation showing their continued manipulation attempts from prison. The judge granted extensions based on the ongoing threat they posed. New boundaries with extended family prevented future exploitation. We established a family policy against lending money for emergencies without verification. Everyone understood that protecting ourselves wasn't cruel but necessary. I discovered joy in helping others escape similar situations. My experience became a roadmap for recognizing and escaping family fraud. The pain transformed into purpose as more victims found freedom. Prison records showed my parents never attended rehabilitation programs. They'd spent their incarceration planning new schemes rather than addressing their behavior. The lack of change validated my decision to maintain no contact. My life at 30 looked nothing like what I'd imagined at 22. The scared young woman who'd given away her last dollar to abusive family had grown into someone who recognized her own worth. Financial security felt like the ultimate victory. The extended family's recovery continued with each passing year. Trust rebuilt slowly among those who'd proven themselves worthy. We'd learned the difference between healthy family bonds and toxic enmeshment. Speaking engagements expanded to include financial literacy programs. I taught young adults how to protect themselves from family financial abuse. The presentations included warning signs specific to family fraud that traditional financial advice overlooked. My partner and I started planning for our own family. We discussed how to raise children with healthy boundaries and financial wisdom. The cycle of exploitation would end with my generation. The final restitution check arrived just before my parents' release date. The tiny amount felt symbolic rather than meaningful. I donated it to a fund supporting elderly fraud victims like my grandmother. Release day arrived with my parents attempting immediate contact. They showed up at my old apartment building, not knowing I'd moved years ago. The building security had my photo and instructions to call police if they appeared. I maintained my new life's privacy carefully. Social media remained locked down. My employer knew about the situation and screened any unusual inquiries. The extended family shared information about sightings to keep everyone safe. 3 months after release, my parents attempted another scam targeting distant relatives who hadn't been involved in the original case. The relatives recognized the tactics from family warnings and reported them immediately. New charges were filed within days. The cycle of crime continued for them, while my life flourished in their absence. Each attempt at manipulation failed because we'd learned their patterns. The family network protected itself through shared knowledge and vigilance. Trent's release followed 6 months later. He immediately violated parole by attempting to contact me. The swift response from law enforcement sent him back to serve his remaining sentence. His inability to change remained consistent. I celebrated my 31st birthday surrounded by chosen family, who celebrated my success rather than exploited it. The gathering included fellow survivors from support groups who'd become genuine friends. We toasted to freedom from toxic families. My career reached heights impossible under family financial drain. The executive position I'd earned came with responsibilities I handled confidently. Success felt sweeter knowing I'd achieved it despite their sabotage. The house my partner and I bought became a symbol of stability they'd tried to steal. Every mortgage payment represented money they couldn't manipulate away. The garden we planted grew strong roots, unlike the shallow connections of my childhood. Extended family gatherings evolved into celebrations of survival and growth. We shared updates about careers, relationships, and dreams achieved. The contrast to old gatherings filled with manipulation and fear felt profound. My grandmother passed peacefully at 90, surrounded by family who'd protected her from further exploitation. She'd found peace in her final years despite the betrayal. Her funeral became a celebration of resilience and the family bonds that survived. The inheritance she left specifically excluded my parents and Trent. Legal documents ensured they couldn't contest or manipulate their way to her remaining assets. Even in death, she protected the family from their greed. I used my small inheritance to fund a scholarship for young adults escaping family financial abuse. The first recipient was a young woman whose story mirrored mine. Helping her escape felt like honoring my grandmother's memory. My parents' second imprisonment made headlines as repeat offenders. The judge showed no leniency for their immediate return to crime. They received maximum sentences with mandatory minimums that ensured longer incarceration. The family fraud prevention presentations I'd developed became part of community college curricula. Students learned to recognize manipulation tactics specific to family exploitation. The program expanded to multiple colleges within 2 years. My story proved that recovery from family betrayal was possible. Each presentation ended with evidence of the life I'd built without them. Audiences saw that choosing yourself over toxic family led to genuine happiness. 10 years after the Columbia scam, I'd built everything they'd tried to prevent. Financial security, loving relationships, career success, and inner peace all flourished in their absence. The scared girl who'd believed she needed their love had become a woman who knew her own worth. The extended family thrived without their toxic influence. Cousins started businesses, aunts retired comfortably, uncles pursued dreams previously impossible. We'd all learned that real family supported success rather than sabotaging it. My partner and I welcomed our first child into a world free from financial manipulation. We taught her boundaries from birth. She'd never know the fear of having her room destroyed for saying no. Love in our house came without price tags or conditions. The support group I'd started grew into a non-profit organization helping family fraud victims nationwide. We provided resources, legal guidance, and emotional support to those escaping similar situations. The organization honored my grandmother's name. I learned that family isn't about blood, but about who shows up without calculating what they can extract. The chosen family I'd built proved more loyal than those who'd shared my DNA. Real love didn't come with manipulation attached. Sometimes I'd receive reports of my parents' latest schemes from prison. Each failure reinforced that I'd made the right choice. They remained trapped in patterns of exploitation while I'd broken free to build something beautiful. The little girl who'd done her brother's homework to avoid violence had become a woman who helped others recognize their worth. Every person who escaped family fraud because of my story validated the pain of going public. Survival became triumph when shared with purpose. My life stood as proof that protecting yourself from toxic family wasn't selfish but necessary. The money they'd stolen had been replaced tenfold. The emotional wounds had healed into wisdom. The family I'd lost had been replaced by one that truly loved me. Looking at my daughter playing safely in our yard, I knew the cycle had finally broken. She'd grow up knowing her worth couldn't be measured in dollars given to manipulative relatives. The generational trauma ended with me, and that felt like the greatest victory of all.